The Maple Leafs ended 2023 with a bang, and not in a good way. They lost both games in this weekend's back-to-back to finish off the 2023 calendar and made a major move between the pipes by placing Ilya Samsonov on waivers. What does this mean for him and the Leafs moving forward, and what options does Toronto have in net? We'll get into all of that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike Distefano, and typically we got Dave Morsuti with us, but he's on vacation right now with the family somewhere, probably a couple cocktails deep in the Caribbean as he's out on a Caribbean cruise right now, enjoying the new year. Happy New Year to everybody. It's now 2024. 2023 was a good year. 2024, hopefully, going to be the best year yet. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Before we kind of got into before we get into the news about what's going on, I do just want to thank everybody for the amazing year that Dave and I just had on this show. We just went through and found out what our entire streaming numbers were and our downloads for the podcast. And honestly, it's incredible. The growth that we had over the year 2023, thanks to you guys, the listeners, was unbelievable. The milestones that we were able to achieve this year was not what we were expecting. It far surpassed our expectations. I'm going to show you guys. I posted this on our Locked On Leafs Twitter page. Just, some of the numbers that we had. The audio downloads for us this year, 677,856, which is up 69% from 2022. You look at the YouTube views that we had this year, 666,564 YouTube views, up 100% from last year. And that's a grand total when you add in your views and your downloads, 1,344,420. Unbelievable. I can't thank you guys enough. Dave and I both thank you guys so much for just those outstanding numbers. And you guys were coming back to listen to us each and every day, Monday through Friday, through the season. And, we're one of the few people that don't take the break in the summer. I know we shortened down to just 3 shows a week during the summer and the off season, but we're still pumping out content regularly and keeping up to date with what's going on. So, we'll continue to do that through 2024. And hopefully you guys continue to consume the content the way that you have. And, be a friend, share it with a friend. That'd be great too, because we want to, take off with this bad boy. Especially you look at, Leafs Lunch was something that I was a part of last year and the last couple of years with TSN. It's no longer there. And I think maybe that has something to do with the numbers that we've seen is there's not, that was a go-to spot for people to get Leafs content. And some people followed me over here to Locked On Leafs. So I really do appreciate that. And it is kind of cool. Like, really, story time before we get into the podcast. And I apologize for getting sappy and whatnot just to start out the new year. But it's, the new year allows you to reflect on what has happened in the past and, makes you think, okay, what do I want to do moving forward? And I was thinking about when I started this podcast, this was years ago, back in 2019, 2020. If you're new to the podcast, you might not have known that this pod has been around that long, but it has. And I know there are some day oneers out there because I got people who message me and tell me all the time, been listening since day one, been listening since the Babcock era. Like, that's how long this podcast has been around. Mike Babcock was still the coach when we started this bad boy. And at the time, we were getting like 100, 200 views. We weren't, growing that much, but over the course of the last I would say, year and a half, really, since, Dave came into the fold and then we moved over to YouTube. It's really expanded our audience. And I think it's been great for the brand and great for the product. And for us to go from, or for myself, rather, I did it for by myself for many years, to go from like 100, 200 downloads per episode to now thousands of downloads per episode. And we just topped the million mark for 2023, 1.3 million views and downloads between all of our platforms. It's amazing. And I got you guys to thank, obviously, as the listeners of the pod, for, being dedicated to consuming the content. And hopefully we can continue to do so moving forward into 2024. Now we can get into what everyone came for on today's show, and that's what's going on with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Big news over the weekend, and that's what we're going to start with. Obviously, we all heard that Ilya Samsonov was placed on waivers on Sunday. He then cleared waivers Monday afternoon and has officially been assigned to the Toronto Marlies. Look, this is a move that we all kind of, not that we saw it coming, I suppose. It's not that we don't see it happen that often. We did see it happen with Jack Campbell earlier this year. So maybe now it's like, okay, this is, something that people are doing. But Ilya Samsonov has been sent down to the Marlies, and a subsequent move was to call up Dennis Hildeby, who's now with the team in California and presumably will get some playing time here. We'll get to that a little bit later. But what is notable is that this could have just been a conditioning stint. Like, he could have just got sent down there for a 2-week stretch so they could try and fix him, work on what they need to, and then call him up once that 2-week timeline is over. This kind of tells me when they decided to fully put him on waivers, they exposed him and they thought to themselves, if he gets picked up, we don't care. Like, that's also what that says. If he goes, okay, whatever. Now we save all that cap space. No one was ever going to pick up a goalie who's got an .860 save percentage, so I don't think the Leafs were really all that worried about it. But what it does say is, they think that this may take more than 2 weeks to fix the issue. So they send him down on waivers, and now he's kind of down in the minors for an undisclosed amount of time. There's no set timeline or a date for when he has to return, unlike which would have been the case if he was sent on a conditioning stint, which some people were suggesting. So I think it is notable that this was a legitimate waivers roster move as opposed to a conditioning stint. And that's just something that I did want to point out. It's really been a fall from grace for this guy. Look, the last few games here have been awful, and he was given that opportunity, to try and get back the net and try and get back in St. Louis, in Columbus this past weekend, and it all fell apart once again. And once, he allowed 1, 2, 3, it just continued to tumble. And then you get a couple of terrible goals that are going, like Adam Fantilli scoring from, 50 feet from out from the half wall, basically 45 feet. Like, it got ugly. A couple of bad goals there again from Samsonov in that game. And it was kind of the last straw. You heard the coach come out and say, hey, this is the NHL, and, we got to get saves at the end of the day. And he did mention Tree Living's gonna, he'll have to do what has to be done to have this team succeed. They're mired in a bit of a losing streak right now. They're giving up points because of this guy. Like, you score 5 goals on the road, you should win that hockey game. And that's exactly what happened with the Blue Jackets the other night. So really tough game for Samsonov, and clearly it was the last straw for the coaching staff and for Tree Living, kind of losing trust in this guy. And now they want to try and rebuild him, because again, they're sending him down to the minors, and the whole point of doing so is to try and get him back to being what he was. According to Kevin Weeks, though, they're going to use all of their resources to try and build him back up. And apparently he's not even expected to really play anytime soon. I wonder if that's maybe them learning from the Jack Campbell situation, where they sent him down to Bakersfield and he didn't really put up good numbers, and maybe that all just made it worse. Not great for his confidence to be allowing 4 or 5 goals against in AHL games. So maybe they say, we don't really want that to be the case. Let's try and send him down and just try and rehabilitate him, get a lot of practice time in, and not be worried about, okay, he has to play games. Like, remember before that Buffalo game, the quote from Sheldon Keefe when he was announced as starter was, well, he's got to play at some point. Like, he's got to play a game. Well, if he's not on the roster, they don't have to play him. They can play somebody else now. And that's kind of the whole reason why they elected to do this, so that, they're not just going to ride Martin Jones into the ground. They've got a back-to-back coming up this week, and they don't have to now, use him both times, or they don't have to put Samsonov out there again to get shelled. This is what Sheldon Keefe had to say on his thoughts on the roster move here to send Samsonov down to the minors. He said, quote, "From my perspective, he's a good goalie that has played a lot of hockey for us, and we have to do all we can to try and get him back." So that's what they're going to try and do, right? They're going to send him down to the minors. They're going to be using all of their resources to try and get him to feel comfortable again, to get him out of his own head. Like, he's lost all his confidence right now. If you go back and you listen to the interviews that he's doing post game, he's not in the right state of mind. He's just not playing good hockey. He knows it, and he is consistently, kicking himself while he's down. So I think it's good for him to just kind of get away from the team, from the media, focus on him, and maybe he can get back up here. I don't know if he will or not. It really, if he's playing anywhere near how bad he was prior to this demotion, definitely not. Like, there has to be some significant improvements, I think, for Samsonov to reestablish himself as an NHLer this year. May he get more opportunities elsewhere, perhaps, but I don't know. It might be soured here in Toronto. You look at the last 4 games where he's been given opportunities to work himself out of this funk, and he's allowed 4 goals, 6 goals, 5 goals, and then 6 goals again this weekend. And that's not even against good teams, like, or good offenses. Like, we're talking about the Islanders. We're talking about the Sabres. We're talking about the Columbus freaking Blue Jackets. Like, these aren't top tier teams. It's not like, tonight they're going into LA and LA's putting up a 6 spot. No, like, these are, teams that aren't great. I mean, they had the decision, okay, we're going to start Samsonov on Friday on day 1 of the back-to-back, or on Saturday, day 2, the back-to-back against Carolina. They opted to throw him out there on Friday. They gave him 5 goals. They gave him a lead, and he pissed it away. So it's a bad situation right now. It's gone from bad to worse, and it's gotten to a point where, the Leafs just sit there and say to themselves, I don't think we can stroll him back out there. It's not fair to him, and mentally it's gotten to a point where it's kind of sad to watch. And also, it's not fair to the team that consistently is going out there and winning games, like playing well, but then you have one little tiny slip up. And, well, I shouldn't say little tiny. They haven't helped him out a whole lot, I will say that. But still, when you score 5 goals in a game, you should be able to win. You score 5 goals and you only allow 21 shots, you should definitely win that game. And that didn't happen on Saturday. So kind of the last straw. You look at his numbers this year. He's got an .862 save percentage, a .394 goals against, and he leads the entire league in goals allowed above expected. 13.3 goals allowed above expected. He's allowing over a full goal per game above expectation. So if you want to sit here and say, well, the defense hasn't played well, sure, that may be the case. But even how poor the defense is playing, he's still allowing a full goal against more than should be based off of the way that the defense is playing. So it's not good for Samsonov. He's going to go down to the minors. The Leafs will, if you want to look at it from a positive, a cap perspective, this does allow them to bury $1.15 million of his contract in the minors. And considering Hildeby makes, I think he's making probably close to league min, maybe like $9.25. It opens up a little bit of space, essentially, for him for the Leafs to get a little bit more space, but still have a little bit of his money against the cap. Looks like it'll be $2.4 million against, but they can save 1.15 by sending him down to the minors. Is he going to be back with the team at some point? I do not know. That I obviously am not privy to anything here. I think they believe that he could come back and be a productive goalie. Like, he was, by most metrics, a top 10 goaltender in the league last year. And the last thing I'll say on this before we kind of move on to what's next here. He was a top 10 goalie in the league last year, yes. And Brad Treliving could have paid him. Like, I don't think anyone would have batted an eye if he signed, a 4.5 year deal at like 5 years, maybe. I don't think anybody would bat an eye, right? A 4x4 for Samsonov coming off the year that he had last year, where he was a 919 save percentage goaltender, 233 goals against. He had 18 goals saved above expectation, which was top 10 in the NHL. Like, he had real solid numbers last year. So he could have given him a big contract, similarly to what happened with Jack Campbell when he went to Edmonton. He didn't. He took him to arbitration. He fought to get as little money as possible, actually, to sign him to a contract, and only just signed him to a 1-year deal. And that might have been the best move that Treliving made all offseason, was opting to do that as opposed to giving him a long-term extension after just one prove-it year in Toronto. So as it stands right now, that's, a bit of a golf clap for Brad Treliving on that move there. So what's the situation like in Toronto now? Well, Joseph Woll is still out to injury and expected to still be out for quite some time. And now with Samsonov rebuilding himself in the minors. Well, we'll get into all of that on the other side. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet. You get some live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tabs. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. It's the best way to find your popular parlays, and so much more. If you like the Leafs tonight, potentially you could put down a wager, $5 on the Leafs tonight against the Kings, maybe an anytime goal from Austin Matthews. You can make any wagers like that over on FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the Locked On Network. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike Distefano, the host of Locked On Leafs. Dave Morisuti, not here for the week. He's out on vacation, enjoying himself with the family. Little New Year's cruise that he is out embarking on, and I'm sure he's a couple cocktails deep at this point. We're recording, I'm recording like near midnight Monday going into Tuesday, so I would imagine he's having himself a good time here on New Year's. I did see a Snapchat, a couple of Instagram photos. He's certainly enjoying himself. Not enjoying himself, obviously, is Ilya Samsonov, with him off of the Maple Leafs roster. He's been sent down to the minors. What is the plan now in net for Toronto? Does not sound like Joseph Woll is close to returning anytime soon. So Martin Jones is going to be the guy right now. Like, that's just what's going to happen. We're going to see Martin Jones in net for quite some time. In the meantime, the team did call up Dennis Hildeby, and or the Hildebeest, as we like to call him. A terrific nickname. We got the Brick Wall and we got the Hildebeest, two young up-and-coming goaltenders drafted and developed by the Maple Leafs. He is joining the team for this California road trip, and there's a back-to-back. There's one tonight in LA, and then tomorrow night they're going to be in Anaheim. I could totally see him getting that game. It makes the most sense, realistically. You give Martin Jones his revenge game against the LA Kings, a team that drafted him and then later traded him when they, makes sense. Jonathan Quick was their guy, a franchise goaltender, and they got a pretty good haul for him. But they drafted him and then traded him away. So he's going to prove, hey, I turned out to be a pretty good goaltender. You give him that game. And then tomorrow night you get Hildeby with against Anaheim. A bit of a younger team, a team that's not playing that great. Potentially a bit of not potentially. It should be an easier contest than LA. And then the Sharks on the weekend, another revenge game for Martin Jones, who spent many years with San Jose and took him to a Stanley Cup final and lost. But That's how I would see this goaltending scenario shaping up for the rest of the week, I would say. But we know what we're going to get in Martin Jones, right? Like, he's a solid veteran who he'll step up when need be. He's played okay for Toronto so far. I did think he gave up a couple of weak 5-hole goals this past weekend, like that opening goal from Michael Bunting, which we all knew was going to happen, right? Former Maple Leaf, GTA-born guy, coming playing his first game against Toronto at Scotiabank Arena. Of course he was going to score. If you didn't lay an anytime goal prop on Michael Bunting, you missed out on a prime opportunity because it was destined to happen, and it happened pretty darn quick on the power play there. But a couple of the goals that he allowed, I thought were kind of weak in terms of, being right through the legs, 5-hole goal. So hopefully that gets cleaned up moving forward. But he's a long-time veteran, and he has the durability to take on a larger workload if needed. And right now it's needed. It's been needed since Joseph Wall went out, with Samsonov being nearly unplayable, basically. And every time they do put him in the net, we always come back saying, all right, well, Jones needs to now take care of business the rest of the way. And I think he ended up with like 2 more starts, Samsonov did, before finally they pulled shoot on that. So I think it'll end up being Jones for a majority of it. But I don't think that he's going to play all the games. Like, I really do think that they're going to give Dennis Hildeby an opportunity. Like, the Hildebeest, here's the thing. Here's what you got to know about this kid. So, yes, he was a 2022 4th-round draft pick. And, I mean, typically that would be insane to think a goaltender who was a 2022 4th-rounder would be ready for the NHL at this point in his career. The difference between Hildeby and every other 2022 draft pick is Hildeby was a double overager. I'm not sure how many there were, but like, he might have been the oldest player drafted in that class. Like, he's not a 19-year-old like Fraser Minton is, who was their 1st-round pick from that year. He's 22 years old. And look, 22, is that a little young for a goalie to be making, his debut in the pros? Yeah, like we see Devin Levi, he's 22. And he's kind of struggled in his first season with Buffalo this year down in the minors. So we've seen, this not go so well for a lot of young guys. Dustin Wolf has been called up, and it hasn't gone great for him in the few games that he's played for Calgary. And overall, I went and I looked into the numbers, and it's not, uncommon to see 22-year-olds get a shot in the NHL. There was 13 of them last year who played at least a game, got at least 1 start at the NHL level. So, like I said, he's not a traditional 2022 pick because he's 22 years old, not 19. So the age, I think, allows this to make a little bit more sense. He's a big dude, 6'7", 225 pounds. So he takes up a lot of the net. I think I saw stats, and he'd be the biggest goalie in the NHL once he makes the start, which is, hilarious to see. He was a beast when he was in Sweden, and that's ultimately what led to him being drafted by Toronto. He killed it in the Swedish Junior League as a teenager, and then ended up making 28 starts in the SHL's, the top tier league, the Swedish league, over the past couple of seasons here. And he combined for 219 goals against and a 921 save percentage with 4 shutouts before finally coming over this year and starting his North American pro hockey career. But that just goes to show, like, he's been playing pro hockey for the last 3 years. So, yes, it's his first season in North America. It's his first season in the AHL. But he's played pro hockey. He's played against men. He's played against guys who, are strong and can shoot the puck. You know what I mean? Like, he's played against top talent, not NHL level talent. Obviously, it's the number 1 league in the world, but he still has played against fully developed and matured men, which is exactly what he'll be doing once he gets up here into the NHL. But he's been outstanding this year in his first season with the Marlies in North America, on North American ice. A 220 goals against average, rather, and a 919 save percentage with the Marlies this season. So he's been fantastic for them. Unfortunately, the Marlies haven't been able to win a lot of games while he's been in net because they're just not scoring a whole lot when he's in net, so not getting much run support. But I mean, those numbers individually are quite outstanding for the minor leagues, because sometimes things break down and you don't quite get those unbelievable stats, and they don't look as rosy in the minors sometimes because the defensive play is a little subpar. So we'll see if he can translate those numbers into the NHL. Like, if you recall, Joseph Wall had a terrific start to the AHL season last year before getting called up to the NHL, and that did translate into NHL success. So, you never do know. Goalies are voodoo. Everybody's different. But just 1 year ago, a young Joseph Wall, who I think was 24 at the time he got his first call up to the NHL, came up, played really well, right? A couple years ago, actually, came up and ended up having to make a start in New York and got a shutout at like 24 years old. That's or at 23 years old now. I think about it. I think it was 23. So not all that different, not much older than what Hildeby is right now. And Joseph Wall had injury issues, and he came from the collegiate ranks. So, didn't have as many pro games in his back pocket as Hildeby has had when he made his first start. So, I think that it's very possible that Hildeby is just a good goalie and he just needs an opportunity. Will this be a situation where he comes up and he wins a job from Martin Jones and becomes the guy, and then it's, the Hildebeest and the Great Wool show the rest of the way? I doubt it. They probably would still prefer that, they don't ruin him, and I think he would be better suited to develop in the minors. But that said, I think that there's a chance for him to show that he can still be a decent goalie, that he can play NHL minutes at the very least. He's crushing it in the American Hockey League, and I know there's a big difference. It's a big leap, but if the Leafs themselves can buy in and help this guy and play solid, not give up a whole lot, similarly to what we saw happen over the weekend. I think if they can keep it to like low event hockey, then Hildebeest could be a competent NHL goaltender for them right now. We'll see what happens. I think he's going to get the start. Like I said, tomorrow against the Ducks. Marty Jones probably going to get the start tonight against the LA Kings. On the other side, we could have a discussion about who else maybe could be available. Like, if Hildeby isn't ready and Hildeby shows that he is, not capable of coming up and playing NHL minutes quite yet, you're still getting very inconsistent play, and they don't want to ruin his development, so they want to try and send him back down. Well, who else might be available? If Joseph Wall's not ready to go, if Ilya Samsonov isn't ready to go, it's Martin Jones, and who else? I've got a list of guys that I will get to on the other side. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. You shouldn't have to worry about when you buy your tickets to the next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from receipt, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. With zone deals, you can pick the section. Gametime picks the seats for big-time savings, and Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms again apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's Mike Distefano, and I am hosting by myself today. It's been a while since I've done a solo show, I might add. Since Dave's been back, there hasn't been, or since Dave has come on the show about a year and a half ago. Actually, I think it's almost been maybe almost 2 full years with Dave at the helm. Now that I think about it, time's going by fast, because I think he joined in February 2022. So yeah, we're going up on 2 full years since Dave has joined me. So I've only done maybe a handful of solo shows since then. So bear with me if I'm gibbering and talking a little bit too much. I tend to do that a little bit and we're already going quite long with this podcast. But hey, it's not every day that you get big news like what happened with Samsonov over the weekend that gives you just a lot to talk about. There's a lot of meat on the bone there. And some more meat that we could kind of pull of it is, okay, well, if not Hildeby, if he proves to not be the guy, if not Martin Jones, if not Joseph Wall, if he's not healthy, and if Ilya Samsonov just doesn't fix himself, unfortunately, and they feel like they can't trust him back out there, who else could they potentially go out and get? I think there's like two options, really. There's two avenues, I should say. They could try and go and get like a legitimate starter. I think there are a couple that might be available potentially if you're willing to pay for it. And I think that I don't necessarily think that is the answer, but they are options. I'll just kind of throw them out there. But potentially like a Jacob Markstrom, for example, out in Calgary, could he be available? He's got 3 years left on his deal, $6 million per. And the reason why he might be available isn't because, they think he's doing poorly or they want to move on from him. They've got a couple other goaltenders that they might, want to start playing a bit more. Like they've got Dan Vladar signed to a long-term deal. He's someone else that'll come up in just a moment. But they also got this kid, Dustin Wolf, who's down in the minors and he's just putting up stupid numbers. He did come up, had a cup of coffee with the team. His numbers didn't look glowing, to be quite honest with you. So maybe they're not quite ready yet after that call up and then later send down when Markstrom got back and was healthy. So maybe they're not ready to give him NHL minutes quite yet, which maybe means that these two aren't available, or at least Markstrom might not be available. Maybe they just want to maybe Vladar would be more so easier to acquire because then Wolf can be the number 2 and Markstrom can be that steady Eddie 55 game type of goaltender. But that is one option. John Gibson would be kind of in the same boat. We've talked about him a lot on this podcast. Leafs Nation has talked about him a lot. His numbers have gone down a lot, like immensely over the course of the last 3 years. They just continue to trend down. He is not playing great hockey. Like let's face it. He's been, a sub 900 save percentage goaltender. He's been mid threes in the goals against, and his goals saved above expectation has been in the gutter as well. Over the last few seasons. I get it. He's playing in front of a bad team, but that's why when you look at those, goals above expectation, that kind of filters out and averages out defense. It's still not great, right? So, Gibson, plus he's making $6.4 million. I don't know if I'd be willing to go there, but I know he's a name that a lot of Leaf fans typically bring up when talking about trading for a bona fide number 1 goaltender. UC Saros is also an interesting name. And I only bring him up because, he's got 2 more years left on his deal. I have no idea if Saros wants to stay in Nashville or if he'd want to go somewhere else, get a payday, and potentially compete for a cup. But he's so good. He's such a good goaltender. He's one of the more underrated goalies in the league. He's consistently like top 5 goalie material each and every year. And he's got 2 years left at $5 million. I would probably look and pick up the phone and call Nashville and say, hey, what would you want for this guy? Because he's maybe the one goalie that I believe I would part with some serious assets to go out and acquire, because that is a number 1 goaltender. That is a guy who'll play 55, 60 games and be an absolute stud. He's been proven to play, some playoff hockey as well. He's got experience. So UC Saros would be maybe the guy who I'd be willing to spend the most to go out and acquire. Not sure if he's available, but they do have a young guy and Yaroslav Askarov they took in the first round a few years back. He just had a shutout this weekend, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So they like him. And Kevin Lankinen's a backup that they have. Potentially a Lankinen maybe could be another option. But, UC Saros would be a very interesting dude if they could acquire him. A couple of like the backup options that I've kind of gone through and gone through Cap Friendly and so, okay, well, who's out there potentially that would make some sense. Like if maybe someone who could compete with Martin Jones for the backup role when Joseph Woll gets back, and someone who could be, a 1A, 1B type of player with Jones until we get, a full stable of goaltenders back here with Toronto. So the list of names I've come up with: Jake Allen. That guy's played out in Montreal for a few years. He's got a couple years left on his deal. A little bit high of a cap hit, 3.85. Like that's higher than Samsonov. I'm not sure if that's one that I love, but it is an option. And I mean, if they retain money on that, you do have a backup, I guess, for a couple of years in Jake Allen. So there's potential there. Anton Forsberg, another situation out in Ottawa. Could they potentially want to, move on from him if they believe Korpisalo is their goaltender moving forward? They did just pay him 4x4. Forsberg has 2 years on his deal at $2.75 million. So potentially that's an option. The Lion King is an option as well. He's an interesting player. He's actually been playing really, really well for the Detroit Red Wings. He's only making $900K. He signed a 2-year deal this offseason, and he's got a .920 save percentage in like 12 or 13 games or something like that for Detroit. So he's playing really well. So that's an interesting name that I would maybe consider for the Maple Leafs to come in and kind of be a number 3, essentially, someone who could basically be another Martin Jones, which is kind of what they're going to need at some point. We talked about Dan Vladar briefly when I brought up Markstrom. He's another guy. He's got 2 years left at $2.2 million. He's kind of young. He's someone who could come in and compete and be a backup. And if the Leafs want to go in a 1A, 1B direction, I think Dan Vladar makes sense, for future wise. He's only like 25, 26. So him and Joseph Woll, relatively the same age. They could definitely split the net, for a while here, and both would be under contract for 2 years. So that's an interesting name. If the Flames are looking to move one of their 2 veteran goaltenders, Vladar could be one that could be brought in. And how about Optimus Rhyme? James Reimer, another potential option for the Maple Leafs. I know, Reimer's a fan favorite here in Toronto, but he's actually, he's been okay out in Detroit. But they've got 3 goalies right now that they're kind of going through and playing. So I'm guessing they would probably be willing to move on from one of them, whether it's Lyon or whether it's Reimer. I'm trying to remember, or Ville Husso's the other guy they got out there. I don't know if Husso's the player for Toronto. Makes a little bit too much money, in my opinion. But one of those 2 could be an option. And I would probably make a phone call because, again, it's tough to carry 3 goalies. And that's exactly what Detroit's doing right now. Plus, that's a team that's lost like 8 of the last 10 games. They're going in a steep decline, which is not great, which is also why you're hearing rumors of potentially Patrick Kane could be shopped at the deadline if they continue to lose games here. So one of those 2 potentially could be an option. Should the Leafs decide to dip into the backup goalie market to try and, boost that position if Samsonov is a no-go, right? Because now all of a sudden you got to replace Jones, your number 3, if you feel that Hildeby isn't ready to go. So that's kind of what that list of names was supposed to do. Either replace or compete with Martin Jones as the number 3/number 2 goaltender for the Leafs, assuming that this is the end of the road for Ilya Samsonov. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. If any of those names interest you, is this the end of Samsonov? Do you think Samsonov should get another opportunity? Where are you at with this whole goaltending situation in Toronto? Because it is a fascinating one. Goalie is always a interesting situation here in Toronto, but I think that it's something that'll have to play out over the course of the next, 6 weeks or so till we get to the trade deadline. It's going to come up a lot sooner than you think. I think we're 2 months till the deadline, but sometimes you get some early movement and maybe we see a deal come in sooner rather than later. But for now, it's Martin Jones and it's the Hildebeest. And I'm excited to see what they can do, right? The Leafs, they go out on their California road trip, begins tonight in LA. It sounds like Martin Jones is going to get the start. He should get the start tonight, drafted by the LA Kings. So it makes some sense. I believe David Kampf will be returning to the lineup. I didn't like that move, by the way. Sitting David Kampf against the Hurricanes, knowing that he is your best penalty killer, and the Hurricanes literally had the #1 power play over the course of the last, like, 3 weeks. They've been unbelievable. They're operating like 50% over the last, like, 7 games or something like that. So it was really strange to, sit him of all people against the Canes. But regardless, I think that he's going to be back into this game tonight. Should be a good one. Should be fun. It's a 10:30 puck drop out west, man. That's what happens. You go out west, and you got to stay up and watch these hockey games. But it's all good. I will be doing that. I'm sure many of you guys will be doing that as well. But what I will do afterwards is get back on this podcast, record another show, hopefully one that's not 40 minutes this time. We'll try and keep it to, 30 minutes or so, and recap what happens for you guys tonight. Leafs and Kings. All right. That's going to do it for me here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast and follow or subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasting platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on X at Mickey_Canuck and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead, leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment down below as well. That'd be greatly appreciated. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the Samsonov situation. Is he done? Is his time over in Toronto? Or can he rehabilitate himself and get back to being a serviceable goaltender for the Maple Leafs? Let me know in the comment section down below or reach out to me on Twitter for that answer. I'll be back on another episode for you guys tomorrow. Until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.